Chosen one, welcome to the space where the misunderstood become unstoppable. If you've ever been the one they couldn't figure out, the one they whispered about behind closed doors, the one they tried to shrink with silence or sabotage, you're in the right place. This isn't for the crowd pleasers or the comfort seekers. This is for the misjudged, the misnamed, the misquoted. Those who carry something so rare, it unsettles the unprepared. You are not too much. You are just enough to rattle every room not built to hold you. The resistance you felt, that wasn't rejection. It was recognition. They didn't come for you because you were wrong. They came because you were right. And deep down, even they knew it. This space is for the anointed ones. The ones chosen not just to survive, but to disrupt, to awaken, to rise. Your path has never been random. Every detour, every betrayal, every lonely night was a setup for something sacred. You are not here by accident. You are the blueprint. So take a breath, square your shoulders, walk like the tables are about to turn, because they are. Let's begin. Looking for purpose and peace. Hit subscribe and start the journey. They carve illusions not to confront a threat, but to avoid facing what the truth reflects. You didn't disrupt, deceive, or outmaneuver anyone. You merely arrived as yourself, whole, steady, without apology, and that alone shook the ground beneath them. They were fine when you were unsure, when you second-guessed every step, when your brilliance dimmed itself to keep the peace. But the moment you began to stand with certainty, without shrinking, it unsettled everything they built on false equilibrium. It's not your words that disturb them, but what your presence silently reveals. You didn't try to outshine, but your authenticity unsettled their performance. You didn't challenge them, but your calm contrasted their internal unrest. Rather than reflect, they retreat. Rather than ask why your confidence stings, they rewrite the script, turn you into a warning, a cautionary tale, an exaggerated threat, not because it's real, but because it comforts them. Your clarity becomes too sharp for their blurred version of events. They reshape your generosity into manipulation, your steadiness into arrogance, not from understanding, but from a need to hide behind distraction. They cloak their discomfort in narrative, hoping the fog they spread will shield their own self-betrayal. Often, they don't even know they're doing it. It's not malice, it's avoidance dressed in projection. In their minds, casting you as the problem becomes a kind of salvation. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. And still, despite the distortion, the rejection, the isolation, they cannot erase you. You remain, unshaken. Their efforts scatter, but your essence gathers. Your silence becomes proof, your stillness a testament. You don't need to defend yourself. Truth is patient, and time always tells. While they recoil from the reflection, you carry on, untouched, undeniable. They don't merely wish you quiet. They want your echo, lost in the noise. This isn't about disagreement or distance. This is strategy in disguise. You weren't meant to last, let alone rise. Once you did, the aim became clearer. Strip you of recognition, wear down your identity, and blur your presence until it's easier for them to pretend you were never real. They aren't simply trying to silence a voice. They want to erase the trace it leaves. This is not passive, it's premeditated. With subtlety, they inject doubt into conversations, color your name with suspicion, decorate their envy with concern. It's not that they want you to be quiet. They want your truth to sound distorted, untrustworthy, disconnected from the person you are. When your heart is full of God's love, it's a sign to give. By tapping the super thank you button and offering $100 or more, You become a vessel of His grace. Your generosity can change lives, reaching hearts you may never meet. You have a divine purpose, and this act of faith carries His light forward. Give now, and may His blessings surround you always. They pretend it's distance, but it's demolition. They don't stop at separation. They attempt deletion. Each remark, each whisper, each smile, laced with venom, is part of a pattern designed to dismantle your influence without getting their hands dirty. Your very presence rattles their illusions. You didn't expose them, but your existence is enough to make their secrets nervous. What truly unsettles them is your restraint. Your refusal to be provoked, to fall into the trap of reaction, starves their narrative. So they shout louder, fabricate more, hoping someone will believe the version of you they invented. But what they can't touch is what was never built by them. What's anchored by purpose can't be moved by performance. They lose access, not because you closed the door, but because they tried to break in and burn the foundation. And now, all they're left with is the emptiness left behind by the person they tried to erase. They engineer confusion with the precision of a silent weapon, not to win a fight, but to dismantle your sense of stability from within. This is not about careless gossip drifting on accident. This is a blueprint, a slow drip method designed to unravel you from the inside. They calculate which truths to bend, which silences to exploit, and exactly where to leave their quiet fingerprints. The aim isn't public embarrassment, it's private erosion. They want your thoughts to become suspicious of themselves, for your inner compass to lose its signal. It doesn't arrive with volume or force. It arrives in passing remarks, in veiled questions, in facial expressions that say more than words ever could. There's no outright confrontation. There's choreography, timed pauses, knowing looks, subtle tones. They aren't hunting facts. They're engineering perception. And once perception wavers, they let the doubt do the rest. This isn't an open battlefield. It's a maze. The damage isn't done through accusation, but through suggestion, seeded carefully until you start to wonder if your instincts are lying. It's psychological sabotage, masked as conversation. And the cruelest part? Many participants don't even know they're playing a role. They parrot what feels familiar, not realizing they've become part of a plan. The instigator wears concern like a costume, their performance persuasive enough to appear sincere. They want to exhaust your mental terrain, to make you question your memory, your decisions, even your worth. If they can't ruin what you offer, they'll tamper with how you see it. But there's something they never prepare for: the resilience that doesn't shout, the part of you that watches, gathers, and never loses sight of the core beneath the noise. That's what remains unshaken. This was meant to destabilize, to isolate, to consume. But it doesn't, because beneath the doubt, there's an unspoken knowing, a clarity that outlasts confusion. And when the fog clears, their entire construction collapses under the weight of what never stopped being true. They don't merely want your image damaged, they want the essence of your identity to be rewired into something alien and unrecognizable. This isn't a stray insult or a heated exchange. This is reputational decay carried out with surgical precision. They don't aim to tarnish. They aim to transform your presence into something people instinctively avoid. Their mission isn't just dislike, it's deterrence. They sculpt your likeness into a warning sign, carefully embedding unease into every mention of your name. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. This is calculated contagion. They treat association with you as though it carries consequences, like proximity alone might cost someone their standing. The methods are indirect, laced with vague caution, and just enough ambiguity to avoid scrutiny. It's not what's said directly, it's what's implied, again and again, until the repetition becomes its own form of belief. People begin to respond to your name as if it's no longer yours. It enters rooms before you do, reshaped and reworded, dressed in assumptions you never approved. Your story, revised by those who never lived it, becomes a shared misunderstanding. The damage compounds quietly, whispered from ear to ear, by those who claim neutrality but act as couriers of corrosion. They don't erase you. They mutate the idea of you. They fabricate an atmosphere of caution around your name, hoping to detach you from your impact. Not because your presence is false, but because it disrupts too many illusions. They fear the weight of your integrity, so they attempt to make your name collapse under invented burdens. But there's a flaw in their design. A name aligned with truth can't be permanently altered. The distortion may circulate, but the foundation holds, and in time, what was manipulated falls apart, and the original meaning resurfaces, stronger, clearer, untouchable. Because what's built on integrity doesn't rot, it roots. They don't fear the strength itself. They fear it being untethered from their influence, not because it harms, but because it exists without permission. There's no betrayal, no act of defiance, simply a refusal to remain in roles they silently wrote, a refusal to dilute oneself to ease the discomfort of those who never learned how to stand without leaning on control. What unsettles them isn't aggression, it's self-containment. You do not wait for their nod to feel worthy. You do not alter your path to soothe their insecurities, and that makes your strength a disruption. When your heart is full of God's love, it's a sign to give. By tapping the super thank you button and offering $100 or more, you become a vessel of His grace. Your generosity can change lives, reaching hearts you may never meet. You have a divine purpose, and this act of faith carries His light forward. Give now, and may His blessings surround you always. Where they expected a lowered gaze, you bring unflinching presence. Where they anticipated apology, you answer with truth. When validation is dangled and you do not bite, they no longer see confidence. They label it as defiance. What was once clarity is now misread as arrogance. What is simply emotional discipline is miscast as distance. They don't recognize that boundaries are a form of preservation, not punishment. But to those who rely on compliance to feel secure, any form of autonomy looks like rebellion. Their language shifts. They frame you as cold, label your calm as calculation, interpret your growth as betrayal. Not because these things are accurate, but because it's easier than confronting why they expect others to need them to feel valuable. They claim you've changed, but what truly changed is their ability to hold influence over you. That's what stings. Not your evolution, but your escape from dependence. They cannot accept that wholeness doesn't require permission slips. They struggle with those who do not seek constant reassurance, who do not shrink to be digestible. Your ability to keep moving, grounded and unapologetic, challenges every unstable foundation they've built within themselves. So they tell a story where your self-assurance becomes the villain, not because you are, but because they never learned how to hold their own. They try to recast you as a warning sign, but your life continues to echo something louder than rumor. That power held with intention does not destroy, it reveals, and no distortion can undo what was never broken. It was never about disagreement, it was about repetition. A loop performed in whispers and glances, set into motion long before your name was even known. There is no uniqueness in what they did, only in how deeply they believed they could do it again. You weren't chosen because of offense. You were caught in a cycle that feeds on integrity too visible to be controlled. They do not act from personal betrayal. They act from a script rehearsed for years. You were not their first effort, only the one they couldn't flatten. They're used to watching people fold, to turning strength into compliance through manipulation disguised as concern. But this time, the pattern split. Where others bowed, you asked questions. Where most lowered their volume, you allowed your presence to speak for itself. They don't know how to dismantle someone who refuses to disappear. It isn't about dislike, it's about disruption. When someone walks in without costumes, without performance, those built on illusions begin to unravel. They try to bury that feeling by singling you out, not because you hurt them, but because your truth lives too loudly. Your refusal to echo their games makes their tactics echo louder than ever before. What they perform isn't punishment, it's ceremony. Exile disguised as morality, projection cloaked in etiquette. They've done it many times before, to people who made the mistake of dimming themselves to belong. This time, they underestimated their subject. They met someone anchored, someone whose value wasn't borrowed, whose presence wasn't detachable. So the ritual falters. The gestures look familiar, but the outcome is unfamiliar. Because this time, the target does not vanish. This time, the script fails to hold. What was meant to erase instead draws attention to the very system they hoped would stay hidden. Their repetition becomes exposure, and what they tried to end becomes the beginning of something far more enduring. They disguise their execution with etiquette, dressing sabotage in silk and calling it sincerity. The weapon isn't rage, it's theater. They don't arrive with raised voices or slander on their breath. They come clothed in calmness, speaking in cautious tones, always with a rehearsed pause between their words. Just concerned, they'll say. I only want what's best. The performance is choreographed to make destruction appear as grace. There's no direct accusation, only shadows cast carefully in just the right places. They deal in ambiguity, letting suggestion do what boldness never could. It's not the insult that stains, it's the quiet redefinition of your entire identity. Their strategy isn't to wound you outright, but to coax others into questioning what they used to trust, turning suspicion into consensus without ever raising suspicion of their own. Their hands remain clean while the damage spreads. They orchestrate the downfall and then stand among the witnesses, pretending to mourn what they themselves dismantled. You try to explain, to point toward the source, but the more you speak, the more it sounds like desperation. That's how the design works, to make your defense look like instability, to cast your clarity as chaos. The cruelty lies in the polish. People believe them not because the story makes sense, but because it's delivered with restraint. It's easier for some to trust soft-spoken lies than hard-won truths spoken through cracked voices. You aren't just being undermined, you're being reshaped into a cautionary tale. And yet, something they never anticipated happens. The script fails to bury you. You don't dissolve under their narrative, you become the evidence of their falsehood. As the fog thins, what they called care begins to reek of resentment, and what they presented as concern fractures into exposed calculation. The curtain falls, and beneath the gentle tone, there's nothing but fear, trembling at the sound of your persistence. The distortions they throw your way are not windows into your flaws, but reflections of the disorder they deny within themselves. None of it is really about you. It's a diversion, a redirected gaze. Every exaggerated claim, every suspicious whisper, every mischaracterization is a mirror turned outward so they never have to look in. Rather than face their fragmented selves, they paint their insecurities over your canvas. They rename your self-respect as arrogance, your insight as scheming, your distance as cruelty. These judgments aren't based on truth, but on what they can't tolerate in themselves. It's not that you're flawed, it's that you're complete in places they're fractured. The issue isn't your growth, it's the way your growth highlights their stagnation. You're blamed for standing steady while they're spinning, for choosing peace while they chase approval. You didn't provoke them, your balance did, and in the absence of introspection, they cast you as the cause of what they won't confront. To the world, it looks like concern. In reality, it's a smoke signal from a fire they lit inside themselves. Eventually, they start to believe the role they invented for you. The mind prefers fiction that soothes over truth that cuts. To justify their own instability, they rewrite your story with characters you never played. The version of you they share bears no resemblance to your essence, but that doesn't matter to them. As long as others buy it, they're safe from accountability. But even illusions have limits. Eventually, your actions, your consistency, your energy start to contrast too loudly with the version of you they've fabricated. People begin to sense the mismatch. They notice the projection. The story unravels, not in shouts, but in quiet realizations. And what's left is the understanding that the image they painted was never a portrait of you. It was a confession in disguise. They orchestrate the collapse, then step back coughing, pretending they're caught in the wreckage rather than the ones who knocked over the first domino. It's not an accident. It's a calculated disruption, cloaked in fragility. They initiate the unraveling, manipulate whispers, stir unrest behind guarded smiles. And when the damage takes shape, they step into the spotlight with trembling voices and practiced wounds. The goal was never conflict, it was spectacle. And in that performance, they appear not as instigators, but as survivors. As tension escalates, they rewrite the narrative mid-scene, adopting the role of the harmed, hoping no one remembers who triggered the collapse. They initiate the misdirection, then cry out as if wounded by coincidence. The story shifts. What was destruction becomes misunderstanding. What was intentional becomes accidental. When you attempt to name what's happening, they twist your truth into aggression, your reaction into proof of their pain. This is not about healing. This is theater. They craft a version of reality where their sabotage is invisible and your attempts at truth become suspect. They rely on confusion to cover their intent. While everyone's distracted by smoke, they hope no one checks the source. That's the trick, to remain blameless while controlling the fallout. The real harm isn't the chaos, it's how they leverage it. The concern they ask for is counterfeit, meant only to deepen the illusion. Their performance is polished, and to the untrained eye, convincing. But the distortion has limits. Eventually, the narrative loses coherence. People begin to see the patterns, connect the timelines, question the roles. What looked like misfortune starts to reek of design. And then, the illusion fractures. The very act of pretending becomes their undoing. Because the thing about manipulation is that it always leaves residue. The narrative they built begins to crumble, not from force, but from the slow realization that what they claim to survive is what they orchestrated all along. Each fabricated tale isn't just slander, it's a signature. They believe their falsehoods bury you, but what they don't realize is every distorted version of your story is being marked, tracked, filed into a bigger truth. Their campaign isn't just a smear, it's a record, etched not in paper, but in something far more precise than memory: consequence. They think loud repetition overrides reality, that if they perform it enough, it becomes official. But distortion is short-lived. It bends under weight, and the longer they push the lie, the clearer it becomes who fears exposure. The silence they mistake for surrender is actually the space where truth gathers its momentum. Because truth doesn't interrupt, it arrives when the dust has settled and the stage has quieted. They don't realize every twist they place on your name comes with a timestamp. Their attempts to erase you are not erasures. They are timestamps of envy, snapshots of desperation, evidence of who needed you small to feel tall. What they said to destroy becomes the very proof of who they are and what they feared in you. What was intended to sever your future ends up building their file. Every invented flaw, every exaggerated tale, every mischaracterization becomes part of the quiet compilation that doesn't fade. They forget. While people forget details, consequences never misplace intention. Eventually, questions rise. Why are they still talking about someone who walked away? Why do they shape stories with no end and no clarity? Why does your silence unsettle them more than your presence ever did? Because it was never about truth. It was always about control. But truth does not vanish. It waits. It documents. And when it resurfaces, it's undeniable. The ones who thought they were hiding the evidence become it. They orchestrated your distance like a quiet siege, not through confrontation, but erosion. It wasn't misfortune or cosmic timing. It was design, a meticulous campaign to loosen your bonds one by one until you were left echoing in your own silence. Not because you failed, but because your presence without distortion was a problem they couldn't control.